My name is Arthur, and up until recently, I led a pretty normal life. I'm just your average teenager. School, friends, and family were the cornerstones of my daily routine. I wasn't particularly popular, but I had a solid group of friends and a supportive family. My parents were always there for me, and my little sister, Emma, looked up to me. Weekends were spent hanging out with friends, playing video games, and sometimes going to the movies. Life was simple and predictable, and I was content with that. It all started subtly. At first, I didn't even notice the changes. It began with small things. Friends not responding to my texts right away, teachers overlooking me when I raised my hand in class, and a general feeling of being overlooked. I brushed it off as my imagination or just bad luck. I mean, everyone has off days, right? But then it started happening more frequently. One day, I was at lunch with my friends, sitting at our usual spot in the cafeteria. I was telling them about a funny incident that happened over the weekend, but no one seemed to be listening. They were all engrossed in their own conversations, laughing and talking as if I wasn't even there. I tried to get their attention, raising my voice a bit, but nothing changed. It was like I was invisible. After school, I went to soccer practice, hoping the familiar routine would ground me. But even there, things felt off. My coach didn't call my name for drills, and my teammates didn't pass me the ball during scrimmages. It was frustrating, but I told myself it was just a fluke. Maybe they were distracted or having an off day too. The real turning point came a few days later. I woke up, got ready for school, and went downstairs for breakfast. My mom was in the kitchen making coffee, and my dad was reading the newspaper. I greeted them, but neither of them responded. I thought they hadn't heard me, so I said it again, louder this time. Still nothing. It was as if I wasn't there. I waved my hand in front of my dad's face, but he didn't even blink. I went to Emma's room to see if she could hear me. She was playing with her dolls, completely oblivious to my presence. Panic started to set in. I grabbed my backpack and rushed out the door, hoping that school would be different. But when I got there, it was the same story. My friends walked right past me without a word, and my teachers didn't acknowledge me at all. I felt like a ghost, drifting through my own life unnoticed. By the end of the day, I was desperate. I tried calling my parents, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I even went to the principal's office, but the secretary looked right through me as if I didn't exist. I shouted. I screamed. I waved my arms, but nothing worked. I was completely and utterly ignored. I don't know what happened or why this is happening to me. It's like I've been erased from everyone's memory, like I never existed in the first place. The silence is deafening, and the loneliness is suffocating. All I know is that something is very, very wrong, and I have to figure out what it is before I disappear completely. Days turned into a blur of desperation and confusion. The more I tried to get someone's attention, the more it felt like I was screaming into a void. I shouted at my parents, waved my arms in front of my friends, and even resorted to knocking things over in an attempt to be noticed. Nothing worked. It was as if I had become invisible, a ghost haunting my own life. I turned to my phone, hoping that social media might offer some solace or answers. But as I scrolled through my messages, I realized they were all marked as unread. My texts and calls went unanswered, and it was as if my existence had been wiped clean from everyone's minds. I posted on my social media accounts, begging for someone to acknowledge me, but my posts remained empty, devoid of likes, comments, or any form of interaction. My profile felt like an abandoned house, slowly gathering dust and forgotten by all. The silence was unbearable, and the isolation gnawed at my sanity. I spent hours online, searching for any clue, any explanation for what was happening to me. I found stories of people experiencing similar things, tales of being ignored and forgotten, but they all ended with no resolution, no way out of the darkness. It was as if I was destined to fade away completely, lost in the void. Then the strange occurrences began. At first, it was subtle. Objects in my room would be in different places than where I left them. Doors would creak open on their own, and I'd hear faint whispers in the dead of night. I tried to brush it off as my mind playing tricks on me, but the occurrences grew more frequent and disturbing. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft, eerie whispering coming from the hallway. It was barely audible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I sat up, straining to hear the words, but they were too faint to understand. Gathering my courage, I got out of bed and slowly walked towards the source of the sound. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, but as soon as I reached the hallway, they stopped abruptly, leaving me in an oppressive silence. Another night, I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open, even though I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. I got up to shut it, only to feel a cold breeze brush past me, sending chills through my body. It felt like something was in the room with me, watching me, but no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. The sense of dread was overwhelming. I could feel my grip on reality slipping, the boundaries between the waking world and my nightmares blurring. I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was at play, something that wanted me to remain unseen and unheard. The loneliness was suffocating, and the fear was consuming. I spent hours pacing my room, trying to piece together the puzzle of my isolation. I combed through every memory, every interaction, searching for a clue, a reason why this was happening to me. But nothing made sense. The world continued to turn, life went on without me, and I was left in the shadows, a forgotten specter. In my darkest moments, I wondered if I had done something to deserve this, if I was being punished for some unknown sin. The isolation was driving me to the brink of madness, and the strange occurrences were pushing me over the edge. I knew I had to find a way to break this curse, to reclaim my place in the world, but I didn't know where to start. The silence was deafening, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I was trapped, unseen and unheard, and I didn't know how much more I could take. As the days blurred together in a haze of fear and loneliness, I knew I couldn't continue like this. I had to find answers, no matter how bizarre or unconventional. I began by diving into research, scouring the internet for any clue or explanation that might shed light on my predicament. I visited forums dedicated to the supernatural, read obscure books on curses and hauntings, and even reached out to self-proclaimed psychics and paranormal experts. One night, while browsing a particularly obscure forum, I came across a thread titled, "The Unseen Ones." The stories were eerily similar to mine. People suddenly becoming invisible to everyone around them, their presence fading from the world. Most of the posts were filled with desperation and hopelessness, but one comment caught my eye. It mentioned a book called The Shadows Between, which supposedly contained accounts of people who had experienced the same phenomenon and had found ways to break free. Desperate for any lead, I tracked down a copy at a small, dusty bookstore on the outskirts of town. The book was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with stories of curses and dark rituals. As I read through the accounts, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Many of the victims had unknowingly crossed paths with malevolent entities or had been marked by curses due to seemingly innocuous actions. One story, in particular, stood out: a girl who had been ignored by everyone after unknowingly disturbing a sacred site. Her tale mirrored mine in many ways, and it filled me with a mix of hope and dread. With this new information, I began to piece together my own timeline. I revisited my memories, examining every interaction and event leading up to my isolation. That's when I remembered an incident from a few months ago. My friends and I had gone hiking in the woods, and we stumbled upon an old, decrepit shrine. Out of curiosity and a sense of adventure, we had explored it, taking photos and even jokingly moving some of the objects around. At the time, it seemed harmless, but now it felt like a pivotal moment. I returned to the shrine, hoping to find more clues. The air was thick with an eerie stillness as I approached the site. The shrine was just as we had left it, but there was something different, an oppressive, almost malevolent energy that seemed to hang in the air. I felt a chill run down my spine as I carefully examined the area. That's when I found it. A small, weathered journal hidden beneath a pile of stones. The journal was filled with cryptic writings and drawings, detailing rituals and warnings about disturbing the site. As I read through the journal, the pieces began to fall into place. It seemed that by disturbing the shrine, we had angered something, an ancient spirit or entity that had the power to erase people from the minds of those around them. The more I read, the more I realized that my fate had been sealed the moment we set foot in that shrine. The entity's power grew with each passing day, feeding off my isolation and despair. The journal also hinted at a way to break the curse, but the instructions were vague and filled with ominous warnings. I had to perform a ritual of appeasement, returning the objects we had disturbed and offering a personal sacrifice. The thought of confronting this malevolent force terrified me, but I knew I had no other choice. I couldn't continue to live in this limbo, unseen and unheard. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I prepared for the ritual. I gathered the objects we had taken from the shrine and steeled myself for what was to come. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind, but I pushed the fear aside, determined to reclaim my place in the world. The realization that I had been marked for this fate was horrifying, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do, and I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. As I stood at the shrine, the weight of my actions pressing down on me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of impending doom. The air around me seemed to thrum with a dark energy, and I knew that the entity was watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and began the ritual, hoping that this would be enough to break the curse and free me from the shadows. The night was cold and silent as I returned to the shrine, the objects we had taken clutched tightly in my hands. I could feel the malevolent presence watching me, its unseen eyes boring into my soul. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I pressed on, determined to face whatever force had plunged me into this living nightmare. I stood before the shrine, placing the objects back in their original positions as best as I could remember. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. With a deep breath, I began the ritual outlined in the journal, reciting the ancient words in a trembling voice. As I spoke, the darkness around me seemed to pulse and throb, the malevolent energy growing stronger. Suddenly, a voice, low and guttural, echoed through the clearing. "Why have you come back?" it demanded. I spun around, but there was no one there, just shadows and the oppressive weight of the entity's presence. I came to return what we took," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please let me be seen again. Let me be heard." The air grew even colder, and I felt a pressure in my chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart. "You disturbed my sanctuary," the voice hissed, filled with anger and resentment. "Now you seek forgiveness?
Reparation.
You are nothing. You will remain nothing." A wave of fear washed over me, but I forced myself to stand tall. "I didn't know. We didn't know. Please, just let me fix this," I pleaded. The entity's presence loomed closer, and I could feel its icy breath on my skin. The darkness around me seemed to come alive, swirling and twisting with malevolent intent. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a shape, a figure standing before me, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It was a monstrous, twisted version of myself, embodying all my fears and insecurities. "You are weak," it taunted, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You don't deserve to be seen or heard." The sight of this grotesque doppelganger filled me with a primal terror, but also a burning resolve. I had to confront this entity, to face my deepest fears if I ever wanted to reclaim my life. "I may be weak, but I'm not giving up," I shouted, my voice trembling but defiant. "I will break this curse. I will be heard." The figure lunged at me, and I felt a cold, suffocating grip around my throat. I struggled to breathe, to fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume me. Every doubt, every fear I had ever felt surged within me, but I knew I couldn't give in. I focused on the love I had for my family, the desire to be seen and heard again, and drew strength from it. With a surge of determination, I thrust my hands into the darkness, pushing back against the figure. "I am not nothing," I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. "I deserve to exist. I deserve to be seen." The figure recoiled, its form flickering and distorting. The malevolent energy around me seemed to waver, as if my words had weakened its hold. I took a step forward, forcing the entity back. "You have no power over me," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I will not be erased." With a final, desperate push, I banished the figure back into the shadows. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air around me grew warmer. The shrine seemed to glow with a faint light, and I felt a sense of peace settle over the clearing. I had faced my fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged victorious. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I knew the curse had been lifted. The entity's grip on me was gone, and I could feel my presence returning to the world. I was no longer invisible, no longer unheard. I had fought for my place in the world, and I had won. With the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I knew that my confrontation with the entity had weakened its hold, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. There was one final step to the ritual that the journal hinted at, something about a personal sacrifice. The thought filled me with dread, but I knew I had to try. I couldn't live in this shadow any longer. I knelt before the shrine, clutching a small blade that had been tucked into the journal's pages. The instructions were vague, but I understood the essence of what needed to be done. I had to offer a piece of myself, a symbol of my commitment to righting the wrong I had done. My hand shook as I made a small cut on my palm, letting a few drops of blood fall onto the ancient stones. "I offer this sacrifice," I whispered, "to restore balance and seek forgiveness." The air around me crackled with energy, and I felt the presence of the entity once more. It loomed over me, its form shifting and pulsating with dark energy. "Is this enough?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. "Have I done enough to atone?" For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The shadows writhed and twisted, and I felt a pressure building in my chest, threatening to crush me. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence vanished. The oppressive weight lifted and the air grew still. I looked around, my heart pounding, waiting for some sign that the curse had been lifted. I stood up, my hands still bleeding, and cautiously made my way back home. The streets were eerily quiet, but as I passed by my neighbors, I noticed something different. They glanced at me, their eyes flickering with recognition. I waved tentatively, and to my relief they waved back. It seemed I had broken through the barrier of isolation. When I reached my house, I was greeted by my family with expressions of surprise and joy. They hugged me, asking where I had been, their voices filled with genuine concern. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt seen and heard. But even as I embraced them, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Had I truly escaped the entity's grasp, or was this another layer of its twisted game? The days that followed were a blur of reconnection and relief. My social media accounts were active again, my friends and family responded to my messages, and life seemed to return to normal. Yet, every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, or hear a faint whisper when I was alone. It was as if the entity was reminding me of its presence, keeping me on edge. One night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I got up and walked to the mirror, staring at my reflection. My eyes seemed darker, haunted by the ordeal I had endured. I touched the glass, and for a moment, I swore I saw a flicker of movement, a shadow lurking just behind me. The entity's curse had been lifted, but I knew I would never be the same. The fear and isolation had left their mark, and I couldn't be sure if the entity was truly gone or simply biding its time. As I drifted off to sleep, the lingering sense of dread settled over me, a constant reminder of the unknown forces that had nearly consumed me. In the end, my fate remained uncertain. I had fought to reclaim my place in the world, but the shadows still loomed at the edges of my reality. The haunting presence of the entity served as a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed.